Hey, I'm Claire. I'm teaching humanities at Butler College in Perth. And the lesson I'm going to be talking about today is a lesson I ran with my Year 8 class. Um, we did civics last term, and we're basically learning about like Australia's governmental system, kind of court hierarchy, House of Representatives, Senate, all that like basic stuff. And then we're also looking at court trials and legal systems, so kind of juries, criminal and civil trials, and kind of the differences between all those. Um, so the lesson I'm going to be talking about today was the first of two revision lessons for a test kind of about civil and criminal trials and all of that stuff. So within this lesson, the learning intention was that students would be able to test their knowledge on lawmaking and civil and criminal trials, kind of that area, and identify areas to work on. And the success criteria was that students will be able to reflect on content areas they are comfortable with and content areas they need to improve on. And they had to select two content areas they wanted to review and prepare to look at in the future before the next revision session, because they needed to work out areas they really needed to improve on before we did kind of a more direct kind of instruction lesson as the revision lesson before the test. So I really wanted students to kind of have their learning be really interactive and game-like. And I wanted to have them work with students of similar ability, so they could identify kind of similar areas of content they were struggling with, and hopefully by working with kids of that similar ability, they could kind of feel a bit more confident in their learning. So I wanted kids to develop the kind of their confidence with their revision and what they've learnt, in order for them to realise that, yeah, because I feel like kids often get quite nervous with their revision and feel like they don't know anything. So I was hoping that in this way they could realise that they did actually know quite a fair bit, and that it was okay for them to have stuff they need to work on, and that they could look at that and kind of plan out what they didn't know, have a look at that kind of before the next formal lesson. So I think it was a good first revision session so kids can kind of remember the breadth of their learning they've covered in the past few weeks and kind of identify those areas they wanted to learn in the future. So looking at constructivism, what I kind of found from my research was the most common form of constructivism was developed by Lev Vygotsky, and kind of is a theory of learning that suggests that people learn from experience and interaction. So that obviously makes learning a really active and constructive process. And so learners connect new information to this previous knowledge that they have, constructing new ideas and kind of understanding through this process of putting little pieces together in their mind, which is obviously really great for revision. So I have identified kind of the three main forms of constructivism. So there's cognitive constructivism, developed by Piaget. I'm going to guess Piaget. I'm going to guess it's French. I don't actually know. Who developed the idea of active learning that is based upon this existing knowledge. There's the most popular social constructivism, developed by Vygotsky, kind of working on that collaborative learning. And Glasses-Feld, who developed this idea of radical constructivism. So emphasizing the fact that knowledge helps us to understand our reality, and in order to learn things we find relevant and interesting, we need to make this schooling relevant. And if it is relevant and interesting and connected to our reality, we want to learn about it. So I really like the idea that constructivism is very like mixed matched and very imperfect, and seen to be non-linear. So it's not consistently just learning new concepts over a period of time. It's that you connect things to previous experiences and previous knowledge. So I think this makes learning a more like natural, enjoyable process, because students feel like they're developing their overall understanding of a concept rather than just simply learning, basically being taught to a test. The fact that they can interact a bit more naturally is really positive. It also makes learning a bit more of like a social activity, and so learners are more encouraged to like work together and share their knowledge and experiences so they can all improve. So that's very much the approach that I took throughout my lesson, as it was very, very student-led lesson. Students are encouraged to acknowledge where they are in this like learning journey or learning stage, and reflect on that and kind of develop their skills together. So in that way, I guess it is quite mixed matched as they all come in with their different understandings and teach each other and test each other's ability, and are able to kind of work on that as a group. So I think that was really perfect for the card revision game, which you'll see in my lesson plan, kind of the instructions for that, as they tested each other and all had different roles and all, it was very interactive as they were all consistently working together. And the second half of the lesson where kids created their own handful of Quizlet questions for each other and kind of tested each other meant that, again, they were consistently interacting with their knowledge. And I think having that game format is really, really good, particularly before having a formal lesson of revision. Kind of means that students are kind of eased into this like revision process and not so it's not so daunting leading into an assessment. And it kind of makes them a bit more wary of what they need to be covering in the next upcoming assessment. So yeah, I really think it makes kids feel engaged, make them feel as if they're involved in this kind of revision process and not just, like listening to a teacher kind of ramble on about what they need to cover. So obviously ICT is a big part of this. Having the section of Quizlet obviously helps students engage in these revision activities. And I think it's really useful for students to have this kind of ICT basis because it means that learning can be portable and kind of engage with it anytime, which is obviously really, really good for kids from low income families because they might be really busy looking after siblings or juggling jobs in school. So obviously being able to do learning portably, maybe through an iPad or a laptop or something, means that they can kind of learn on the go and work within those realms that they might be in. Obviously that's dependent on financial restraints and stuff, but I think just being able to have a bit more of a portable learning method is helpful. And yeah, having kids be able to create their own Quizlet means that they're able to, further engage kind of closely with their learning, potentially work out how they would pose questions to other students and help them learn more, which is always beneficial. And obviously Quizlet similarly is quite game-like, so it really helps them kind of reflect on their learning and hopefully perform better in their assessments. So in terms of diverse learners and kind of differentiating, I think the way that I chose the groups, and so it meant that students were grouped together with students of a similar ability. So as you'll see in the lesson plan, there are lower level students working together with a set of questions and higher level students working together with a similar set of questions. So these are obviously different and provided to specific groups, but the questions were kind of appropriate for any student. It was just kind of what was asked and maybe how they were asked that were harder or easier. So it meant that if for whatever reason students were put in a different group or questions were swapped, it wasn't as if it was super obvious that these students were maybe having easier questions or harder questions, therefore making students feel more comfortable in the space, making it more safe space for those kids. And I think it is really important to obviously make groups of mixed ability as often as possible. I really like group work, as long as it's well coordinated and every kid feels as if they have a role. But I think for revision, it's really good to have kids who have a similar ability together, because it's not as if kind of one or two kids are always taking the lead. Kids always feel as if they are being looked after kind of by kids of a similar ability, and they don't really feel uncomfortable just trying to go over a concept that they might not be that familiar with. So I think it's good to kind of have kids of a similar ability together. However, I think all kids still learn a lot of skills regardless of whether they're a higher or lower ability, even if they're quite familiar with the content, because they're teaching each other skills and teaching each other content by running through things after they do their card revision game, or by creating those Quizlets. They're still learning a lot. So overall, I think the lesson was actually really effective. I always get surprised, I think, when I put kids into really kind of mature roles and let them take control of their learning, because they love it. They really take that ownership. They really love being able to move around and being able to interact a lot in their learning, because I think it's something that even me as a teacher and maybe other teachers overlook sometimes, how effective it can be. So, students were really able to reflect on these content areas they were struggling with, and they were able to highlight what they wanted to work on before the test. I think having that kind of game aspect makes learning a lot more fun, and it means that those kids were really a lot more switched on and engaged in the following lesson. Even though it was more direct instruction and kind of discussion based, which can be an issue for some kids, but I think because they'd done these fun game activities the lesson before, they were really aware of what they wanted to learn about and were a lot more switched on in that lesson, which is really, really good, particularly from kids who aren't as engaged. I think if they were really able to participate in that game activity and see kind of what they wanted to do, it helps them a lot in the second revision lesson. In terms of how I kind of worked out if the lesson went well, I did a FISTA to 5 assessment on kind of how they further understood all these topics and whether they enjoyed the lesson. And it was, pretty positive, so that's always nice to see, as well as reviewing the success criteria as a class and kind of seeing what kids thought about it. For a exit ticket, kids wrote down 2 things they wanted to learn about, and maybe, just areas they wanted to improve on, and had to make sure that they'd showed me that they'd worked on that in the next lesson. And so they've done a bit of homework and kind of looked at things that they wanted to. In terms of the future, and I'm almost running out of time, in terms of for the future, I think it's really important that kids probably had a little bit more time. Like, we probably could have split that into 2 lessons, had more questions in the car revision activity, and had the Quizlet potentially be a little bit longer, as kids really wanted to do both, and so therefore they were kind of rushing the activities or spending too much time on one over the other. And so because of time, they only really had like 20 to 25 minutes per activity, so that definitely could have really been extended to an hour, and they had 1 whole hour on each section. But overall, I think it went quite well. I haven't finished marking all of the assessment, but it's looking quite positive at the moment. The fact that they got to have all those like extra revision and those kind of game activities meant that they were quite engaged. Also, I think it's a good idea for like the end of this term. Kids are always kind of tired, and so having a bit more of a fun revision, fun way to do revision helps them a lot. But yeah, I think it went well.